The Committee on House Administration will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair may declare recess at any time. Also, without objection, the meeting record will remain open for 5 legislative days, so members may submit any materials they wish to be included therein. Thank you, Ranking Member Morelli, members of the committee, and our witnesses for participating in today's hearing. The purpose of today's hearing is twofold. First, it serves as a long overdue oversight hearing with the Elections Assistance Commission, or EAC. This is the committee's first oversight hearing of the Elections Assistance Commission since 2011. As chairman of the Committee on House Administration, I can assure you times are changing. I'm excited. We're committed to a robust oversight of our federal agencies to ensure we're protecting taxpayer dollars. Second, today's hearing will examine what improvements can be made to the EAC through the American Confidence in Elections Act to help improve voters' confidence that our nation's elections are free, fair, and secure. Congress serves as an important check on federal agencies to ensure they're fulfilling their purpose. The EAC was established to serve as an independent, bipartisan commission charged with helping voters participate in the electoral process and to help confirm election officials improve the administration of elections. Following the 2000 election, Congress decided that election administration problems were big enough that a new federal agency needed to be created. In its first 6 years, the EAC doled out $3 billion in federal taxpayer dollars in grants to states and has spent billions since. While some states have used the money effectively, we know some states have not. As part of the CARES Act, the EAC received $400 million in additional grant funding to prepare for the 2020 election cycle. The GAO found that the EAC is unable to account for the full $400 million due to poor accounting policies. The GAO also found that EAC conducted minimal oversight. The reporting made, quote, it difficult to determine how grant funds were spent across states, end quote. The failure to accurately track how states use these federal grants has potentially enabled significant waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm also concerned that some states spent the funds for political purpose rather than improving election administration. Let's look at how California spent their 2020 funds. The state of California was awarded $35 million in federal funds. California spent the money on a Get Out the Vote campaign. The campaign targeted specific voters. The contract was awarded through an expedited process. The firm that was awarded the contract was SKD Knickerbocker. SKD Knickerbocker was Biden's campaign advisory firm. If you went to the company's website, you would see they listed themselves as part of, quote, Team Biden. If that's not a conflict of interest, I don't know what is. It's a violation of federal law to use HAVA grant funds for Get Out the Vote activity. The former EAC Inspector General stated that the contract between the California Secretary of State and SKD Knickerbocker presented a risk of improper use that required further examination. The American people demand more transparency and accountability in their government, especially with respect to election. Today, we'll bring much needed oversight to the EAC to examine how we can eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. In doing so, we can help improve voters' confidence in both the EAC and our election process as a whole. I'll now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Morelli, for 5 minutes for the purpose of providing his opening statement.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Stile, for welcoming us all today. I want to thank our witnesses for being here this morning. The role of the Election Assistance Commission, EAC, is a critical one. Every American must be able to cast their ballot freely, fairly, and securely, and to have their vote counted as cast. Voters cannot do that without the hard work of the officials and poll workers who administer elections, and EAC's support of these officials is crucial. The EAC was established more than 20 years ago by the Help America Vote Act, also known as HAVA, with broad bipartisan support. In the past 2 decades, the EAC has evolved to meet its mission and to adapt to new elections landscape. We should maintain the spirit of bipartisan support through all of this. As election-related mis- and disinformation has grown, voters bear a growing burden of having to sort fact from fiction. A trusted clearinghouse of information and resources such as the EAC is invaluable to providing voters with resources they urgently need and ensuring election officials have the tools to educate voters and conduct safe and secure elections in an ever-changing environment. The EAC provides assistance as election officials face growing threats and partners with other federal agencies to address critical infrastructure needs. In recent years, we've seen attempts to undermine public trust and confidence in our elections and the electoral process. And while voter confidence has improved in the last couple of years, having a trusted messenger of election information is vital to our democracy. One of the most significant needs in election administration is robust and consistent funding. Since 2018, Congress has provided more than $950 million in HAVA security grants and $400 million in CARES Act funding, but more is needed. Indeed, President Biden's budget called for investing $5 billion over the next 10 years, and I fully support the President's budget request. Maintaining our democracy requires resources, and budgets reflect society's priorities. So we need to make sure that we're consistent about this because that reflects our support for fair and open and accessible elections. The need for funding is acute. Estimates for what it would cost to adequately fund elections over the next decade are in the billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. Despite being designated critical infrastructure in 2017, federal investment in elections is irregular, unpredictable, and insufficient. Simply won't do. We must provide sufficient, regular, and predictable funding for states and local election administrators through HAVA grants, as well as fully funding the EAC. As a ranking member of this committee and a member of the House Appropriations Committee, I look forward to working with my colleagues to provide an adequate amount of election funding as an investment in protecting democracy, empowering election officials to do their good work, and to approve and modernize federal elections. For years, the EAC was underfunded, targeted by my colleagues on the other side with measures to eliminate the agency. I hope we've moved on from the past days and can all agree that the EAC has a critical role in our electoral process. It should be equipped with the funding necessary to meet its mandate and the evolving needs of our election officials. I was heartened to hear in recent testimony from Vice Chair Hovland and Commissioner Palmer about educational tools the EAC has developed for election officials to utilize new programs the EAC is working on, such as the Field Services Program and the regular engagement of the Commission with state and local officials and other federal partners. I look forward to hearing from all the commissioners today about the work the EAC is doing with election officials around the country about the implementation of the updated guidelines for voting systems and how the Commission is preparing for the 2024 elections. Additionally, there is always room for program improvements. We all want to ensure taxpayer dollars are spent effectively and efficiently. I look forward to hearing from Inspector General Schlitz about opportunities for those improvements. Excuse me. The work we do now, laying a bedrock of education about the voting process, strengthening partnerships among federal, state, and local governments will further bolster voter confidence ahead of the 2024 presidential election. The 20 and 22 elections showed that our national democratic experiment can hold, but we must remain steadfast in our commitment to democratic principles as we head into this next election cycle. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, and thank you all again for being here, for the important work that you do each and every day. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Without objection, all members' opening statements will be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Today we have two witness panels. We welcome the commissioners on our first panel, and Ms. Brianna Schlitz, Inspector General of the Elections Assistance Commission, will participate on our second panel. Commissioners, we appreciate you being with us today, and we look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to paragraph B of Committee Rule 6, the witnesses will please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show the witnesses answered in the affirmative and may be seated. I'll now introduce our first witness panel. Our first witness, Chairwoman Christy McCormick, was confirmed by unanimous consent to the U.S. Senate on December 16, 2014, to serve as on the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission. Chairwoman McCormick has twice served as chair and currently serves as the chairwoman of the EAC and is the designated federal officer for the Technical Guidelines Development Committee. Our next witness, Commissioner Benjamin Hovland, was confirmed by the U.S. Senate on January 2, 2019, and currently serves as Vice Chairman of the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission as the designated federal officer for the Local Leadership Council. With 20 years of experience in elections, Commissioner Hovland's career has focused on legal issues related to campaign finance regulation and the administration of state and federal elections, including recent poll worker training, voter registration list maintenance, statewide database matching, voter education, and ballot initiative litigation. Our next witness, Commissioner Donald Palmer, was nominated by President Trump and confirmed by unanimous consent to the U.S. Senate on January 2, 2019. Commissioner Palmer is a former Secretary of the Virginia State Board of Elections and served as the Commonwealth's chief election official from 2011 to 2014. He also previously served as Florida's state election director. And finally, Commissioner Thomas Hicks was nominated by President Obama and confirmed by unanimous consent of the U.S. Senate in 2014 to serve on the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission. Prior to his appointment with EAC, Commissioner Hicks spent nearly 10 years at the Committee on House Administration, serving as Senior Elections Counsel and Minority Elections Counsel. We appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. As a reminder, we've read your written statement and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Under Committee Rule 9, you're to limit your oral presentation to a brief summary of your written statement unless I extend the time in consultation with the ranking member. Please remember to press the button on the microphone in front of you so the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, you'll see a light that will turn green. 4 minutes, it'll turn yellow. Then it'll turn red and we'll ask you to wrap up. I now recognize you, Ms. McCormick, for 5 minutes for the purpose of making an opening statement.
Chairman Stile, Ranking Member Morelli, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the work of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission as we prepare for the 2024 elections. We appreciate the committee's crucial oversight efforts and close attention to the EAC. Our nation's elections have faced increased scrutiny in recent years, and the committee has responded by demonstrating leadership in helping to support election administrators. By conducting this important series of congressional hearings, the House Administration Committee has shined a spotlight on increasing America's confidence in elections. As you move forward and consider election administration reform, the EAC stands ready to assist and carry out the provisions of that legislation. It is essential that U.S. elections are conducted with integrity and transparency and are free, fair, and trustworthy. The bipartisan EAC works to uphold this charge each day. Over the past decade, the field of election administration has faced ever-growing challenges and the need for increased technology improvements to our election systems. Many of these challenges, including questions about adequate funding and security for voting systems, are not new. Others, however, have increased suddenly in recent years. For example, social media continues to evolve, with new platforms and generative AI tools making voter education more challenging. In addition to administering elections and voter education, officials must still prepare for cyber, physical, and personal security threats. Many election officials have left the field, citing safety, increased requirements and expectations, and a lack of resources. Some communities have seen their entire elections departments resign. Now more than ever, election officials need our support. With the help of this committee, the EAC is determined to do all it can to meet these challenges. Over the past year, commissioners have redoubled outreach by resuming travel across the country for in-person meetings, presentations, and visits with state and local election officials. Discussions during these visits underscored not only the outstanding work of election administrators in 2022 midterms, but also the significant impact of efforts by the federal government to provide guidance, monetary resources, and best practice materials. Election officials have expressed sincere gratitude for recent assistance, especially for resources dedicated to safety and security. This includes $955 million in HAVA security grants provided by Congress and administered by the EAC. With support from Congress in the form of increased agency operating budget and more consistent HAVA funding to the states, the Commission continues to fulfill the agency's mission to improve the administration of federal elections and to help Americans vote. As you are aware, the decentralized nature of U.S. elections results in a wide variety of practices, laws, and regulations. To support the country's multitude of election situations and meet HAVA's charge with developing election guidance, the EAC's Clearinghouse Division has generated a depth of informative products, including updated Quick Start guides, a new version of the Election Management Guidelines, which is a primary for election administration, guides, checklists, and one-pagers, white papers, simulation videos, toolkits, and other products to assist election officials. These documents reflect the need for unbiased, trusted source of guidance as election officials navigate the complexities of election administration. This is especially important now as we welcome and train the many new officials across the country. Earlier this year, the agency hired an experienced government leader, Stephen Frid, to serve as our new executive director. The EAC has also hired needed support staff to assist the election process, and specifically the role it plays as critical infrastructure. Additionally, the EAC marked the 20th anniversary of HAVA in 2022, commemorating the historic milestone with the launch of Help America Vote Day and the celebration of the second National Poll Worker Recruitment Day. With more than 3,000 counties and thousands of localities, it takes nearly 1 million poll workers to operate election polling sites. This process supports more than 209 million registered voters. The AC continues to strategically promote election worker information on social media and on our website. We created helpamericavote.gov, a permanent outreach platform in 2020 in service of the first National Poll Worker Recruitment Day. Over the course of 2022, the AAC's poll worker web pages had over 263,000 page views. We regularly receive modifications from election offices, and based on their responses, information is updated consistently. Looking forward to 2024, with ongoing support from Congress, the Commission will provide the necessary assistance to election officials to mitigate challenges and protect the integrity of U.S. elections. I'd like again to thank the committee for its oversight and support of the EAC, as well as for the opportunity to speak here today. I will now turn the discussion over to Commissioner Ben Hovland to discuss the Commission's internal financial oversight and grants management.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman McCormick. Vice Chair Hovland, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Stile, Ranking Member Morelli, and members of the committee for inviting us to testify about the work of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. My name is Ben Hovland, and I'm the current Vice Chair of the EAC. A core component of the EAC's mission is distributing, monitoring, and auditing the use of federal grants for the improvement of election administration and security. Federal HAVA funds, including the $955 million provided since 2018, are a key resource for election administrators responding to increased technology and the changing demands of the field. To emphasize the importance and impact of this funding, I would note the election infrastructure sector-specific plan states, quote, "It is impossible to make an honest assessment of the election infrastructure subsector's risk and the potential to mitigate that risk without an understanding of the chronic resource issues the subsector faces at all levels of government," end quote. As we look toward 2024, I believe it has never been more challenging to administer elections or more expensive. That's why grant funding in partnership with the states is so crucial, and we value your efforts to address the needs of state and local governments through the congressional appropriations process. As of this March, 95% of the FY 2018 election security grant funds have been expended, including additional election security funds from FY 20, 22, and 23. States have spent a total of $529 million in funds awarded between 2018 and 2023, which is approximately 56% of the available grant funding. The spending rate depends on states' planned use, with some states allocating the funds for long-term programs or resources. Some states provide these funds to local governments in the form of subgrants, while others rely on these funds for staff and materials at the state level. With each state's different security priorities and timetables for significant purchases, such as voting system replacement or new statewide voter registration databases, usage rates have varied across the country. The next expenditure reports are due to the EAC on July 30th. As set forth under HAVA, audits of election security grants are conducted after a state begins to expend the provided funds. Alongside distribution and administration efforts, the EAC's Office of Inspector General recently added resources and staff to better monitor state spending of election security grants. With new staff leadership in place, the agency is invested in building up staff capacity strategically across the agency. However, the EAC still faces significant attrition challenges. It's essential that we maintain adequate staffing levels in mission-critical functions to ensure statutorily mandated requirements are met. The EAC's Inspector General has raised structural issues related to HAVA that are discussed in her report on management challenges for the U.S. Election Assistance Commission in fiscal year 2023. My colleagues and I concur with those observations and have included them in our legislative recommendations. Of particular note, the inability to pay competitive wages compared to Congress or other federal agencies hampers our ability to attract and retain talent. We are, however, committed to doing everything we can with the resources we have. The EAC is grateful for the increased funding provided by Congress in recent years. After facing over a decade of significant fiscal constraints, the EAC returned to pre-2010 budget levels for the first time in FY 2023. For FY 2021 and 22, the EAC successfully adapted and executed the operating budget provided by Congress, ending each year with an obligation rate over 99%. Congressional funding has been fully utilized, enabling the agency to provide much-needed assistance to address some of the pressing challenges facing the election community. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hovland. Commissioner Palmer, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Style, Ranking Member Morelli, and members of the committee. I echo my fellow commissioners in our appreciation of the investment you have made in the nation's elections through continued support of the EAC. In preparation for the 2024 election, the EAC will continue to test and certify the nation's voting systems and will continue, and the American public should be confident that their ballot will be counted. In 2023, the EAC will advance our testing and certification efforts in several areas. A voting system certification does not end with a successful test in an accredited laboratory. Rather, the review of these voting systems continues during the lifespan of the voting equipment. As a result, the agency is preparing to launch an innovative field services program to help election officials strengthen their overall posture and preparedness with EAC certified systems. This on-site collaboration is important for several reasons. First, the implementation of system reviews in the field will ensure that equipment delivered to jurisdictions is equivalent to what was purchased. The effort will analyze system hardware and software configurations to verify the equivalency of the equipment to EAC certifications. Additionally, there will be jurisdiction site surveys of voting systems, the best practices assessments, collection of system census information, and analysis of anomaly reports. We recently onboarded the Field Services Program Manager and look forward to building out this initiative. In 2022, the Commission made considerable progress by fully operationalizing version 2.0 of the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, or VVSG. The new guidelines incorporate technological advancements in cybersecurity, accuracy, accessibility, usability, and auditability. Adoption of the EAC's new lifecycle policy, along with the accreditation of 2 voting system test laboratories, are necessary steps toward the realization of voting systems that are VVSG 2.0 tested and certified. The EAC has one system that is being currently tested against VVSG 2.0, and the commissioners just recently visited the ProV&V, the test lab, and got to see firsthand some of the testing that is going on in Huntsville, Alabama. We'd also like to take this opportunity to emphasize that VVSG 1.0 and 1.1 certified systems will not be decertified by the EAC as a result of migration to the new guidelines. Voting systems that are currently deployed are still accurate and reliable, may continue to be used, and do not need to be immediately replaced or recertified to 2.0. In addition, they will continue to be tested and updated with security patches. It will take time and significant monetary expenditures for jurisdictions to implement VVSG 2.0. So it's unlikely that systems certified to 2.0 will be used in the 2024 elections. Congress and the American people, though, should have absolute confidence in this process. The EAC has amplified this message by publishing a communications toolkit to assist election officials in communicating about VVSG standards, updates in election security, and helping to boost confidence in the critical infrastructure of our election systems. As part of our election technology efforts, the agency launched the Election Supporting Technology Evaluation Program, or ESTEP. This technology includes electronic poll books, electronic ballot delivery systems, election night reporting databases, and voter registration portals. These election supporting technologies are crucial tools for both election officials and voters. As more states and localities adopt these technologies, officials are looking to the federal government for voluntary standards and guidance similar to what is provided currently in the VVSG. Election administrators today must rely on a patchwork of state laws, regulation, and certification programs of varying degrees and review. An established EAC program will provide for the development of robust voluntary security standards, testing, guidance, and training materials covering these election-supporting technologies. Attacks from nation-state actors against our election infrastructure have specifically targeted election systems, as I pointed out in the past, and these attacks are only going to escalate. So the first technology pilot for ESTEP is electronic poll books, and these are critical election supporting technology for election officials as they're used in the polling place. As the cybersecurity threat landscape across the election community continues to evolve, the EAC is planning a voluntary coordinated vulnerability disclosure program. The EAC will lead a program to quickly identify and respond to vulnerabilities in our voting system alongside our federal partners. Development of this program is in its preliminary stages and will require staff and resources to be fully realized. I would like to thank again the committee for allowing us to speak with you today. I will now turn the discussion over to Commissioner Tom Hicks to further expand on the Commonwealth's wealth of clearinghouse products, further briefly mentioned by Chairwoman McCormick.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. Commissioner Hicks, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Stile. Is it on? Okay. Ranking Member Morelli and members of the committee for having us here today. My name is Thomas Hicks. In addition to the developments my fellow commissioners have shared, the agency has also invested in increasing our clearinghouse capabilities. The EAC's clearinghouse division, composed of former election officials and subject matter experts, help the agency share and develop resources for both the public and election administrators. In this role, the EAC serves as a trusted source of nonpartisan election information, especially in the ever-evolving election landscape as the field of election administration continues to see high levels of turnover. Leading up to the 2024 elections, the Clearinghouse Division has released more than 60 products over the past 2 years, including a wide range of best practices and toolkits. Topics range from resources on physical security threats against election officials to EVE's data collection and analysis. Clearinghouse products offer overall guidance to new election officials in conducting elections, such as improving chain of custody procedures, auditing, and better serving voters with disabilities. This includes our new election management guidelines, updates with increased focus on relevant election technologies that have changed since the last release 15 years ago. All of the products developed by the Clearinghouse Division are guided by the parameters set forth in HAVR. We have heard from election officials across the country about the escalation of threats they, their colleagues, and poll workers have faced. The agency has developed and distributed clearinghouse resources and information from other federal partners, such as our dedicated landing page, as well as issuing guidance with the Election Security Grants Assistance. Another issue of concern are risks to the supply chain. While specific rules relating to paper ballot ordering are determined at a state level, there are areas where the Clearinghouse Division can provide guidance moving forward, particularly in the event of an emergency. In the summer of 2022, the EAC released an alert about the nationwide paper shortage and guidance on how to plan for depletions of paper inventory on Election Day. Additionally, states may use HAVR election security grants funding for procuring ballot stock that has security features such as watermarks and unique ballot identifiers. Our grants team also issued guidance on this matter. The EAC will publish the 2022 Election Administrating and Voting Survey, or EVES, at the end of this month. This biannual report collects data on election administration from nearly 6,500 local election jurisdictions across all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the U.S. territories. EVES data is utilized by countless stakeholders in the election community. The EAC also remains committed to election officials fulfilling the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act and HAVA's promise of a private and independent vote for all eligible Americans. We've hired a full-time subject matter expert for accessibility to lead these efforts. The EAC is working on a national study to document the experience of voters with disabilities in the 2022 midterms. The survey will be released this summer. The Commission intends to use the results to produce actionable items that are necessary to meet HAVA's vision of fully accessible elections. Our other voting accessible resources include toolkits for in-person voting, voter registration, vote by mail, and assistance for voters with language access needs. These language resources were updated following the most recent update to Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act requirements, which requires 333 jurisdictions to provide language assistance. With the 2024 election cycle already here, election officials face an ever-growing list of responsibility and challenges. The EAC is working diligently to help them prepare for the expected and the unexpected to provide the best voting experience possible for every voter. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of the work of the EAC and your commitment to election administrators, poll workers, and voters. There's still a lot that needs to be done, and we look forward to working with you on these issues. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering questions and feedback you may have.
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. We thank all of our witnesses for being here today. I'll begin our questions today, followed by the ranking member. We'll then alternate between sides. I now recognize myself for the purpose of questioning our witnesses. We'll hear from EAC Inspector General Schletz soon on the recently submitted OIG semi-annual report to Congress. Commissioner and Chairwoman McCormick, you submitted a response to that report 2 weeks ago stating that you were pleased that the California audit recommendations have all been resolved and closed. The audit was conducted because California awarded a $35 million contract through an expedited process to Joe Biden's main election advisory firm. This doesn't inspire confidence that our funds, EAC's responsibility over being properly used. And relating to the funds, the EAC budget 5 years ago was $9 million. In 2024, budget requests asked for almost $34 million, a roughly $25 million increase from just 5 years ago, and almost 300% increase in funds. Commissioner McCormick, is the EAC's jurisdiction increased since its creation under HAVA in 2002?
Only by the addition of the Northern Mariana Islands, Chairman Stile, but we do have increased work on the commission. There has been an expansion in the concern over cybersecurity. We do have a lot more work to do to train election officials across the country. We do have increased responsibilities with grant management and making sure that the grants provided by Congress are appropriately used. We were also concerned about the California contract between SKD Knickerbocker and the California Secretary of State's office. In fact, we received several letters from this committee, and we also asked our Inspector General to look into that contract because of the concern of the inappropriate use of HAVA funds for get out the vote and voter registration activities.
What, Commissioner McCormick, I mean, if we look at the website, I mean, SKD Knickerbocker, I mean, this wasn't overly complicated. I mean, you go to their website, and it is Joe Biden for president. They're their SKD is proud to be a part of Team Biden. They're taking $35 million of federal taxpayer money to run an election. They run an expedited grant process, and the grant process can't be for get out the vote. It's got to be to properly administer their elections. And they gave $35 million of federal taxpayer money to someone that's a proud member of Team Biden and expected that the American people should have confidence that there's not political gamesmanship in this grant?
We agree with you, Congressman. This is not an appropriate use of HAVA funds, and that is why our Inspector General, our new Inspector General, came in and did an investigation and audit of those HAVA funds that were provided to California.
But what did we do about it? The $35 million went out, went to California, was spent.
Well,
what's the ramifications for spending $35 million to a proud member of Team Biden?
Well, the Inspector General's office found that the money that was used for those activities was actually state funds and not HAVA funds. So the inappropriate use of those monies was not by federal funds, it was utilized by state funds. And she resolved that investigation and closed that question out. However, that does mean we still remain concerned about how HAVA funds are used and whether they're being used appropriately, documented appropriately, and whether they're in can be reconciled with the plans that the states provide to us on how they're going to use the funds.
And so I read your written testimony, and in your written testimony, you note that you're going to use some of this increase, the $25 million increase that you're requesting, to enhance the auditing and oversight
Correct.
of the grant making. How big is the team now? How big is it going to be? What are your needs in that respect?
Well, we have several members we have maybe, I think, 3 members in our grants division right now. We hope to expand that. We also are expanding, the Inspector General is expanding her team as well. And, we need to have more resources to be able to have appropriate oversight. One of the issues that we have is that we have a short timeline when we do get this money from Congress to get that money out to the states. But that doesn't excuse us not overseeing those funds appropriately, and it takes resources to do that. And we appreciate that Congress has provided that to us.
So in 2022, you had 49 employees. It grew last year to 65. The request is to take it to 87, almost doubling in just 2 years. And so as we think about the new 16 people that you're looking to bring on, you referenced increasing and improving the audit and oversight. Are there other specific things that they're going to work on?
Well, we have personnel that we're trying to place into the field to do field services, following up on the testing and certification program. Right now, we have no visibility of the voting systems once they leave our laboratories. We plan on hiring field service auditors to go out into the country and to make sure those machines stay up to date and are still meeting the certification requirements, and to assist election officials in any kind of issues that they have with maintaining their voting systems.
Okay, I'm gonna go back because I pulled up while you were speaking, the Office of the Inspector General report that according to SOS, 11.8 million in EAC HAVA funds were used for SKDK contract, 9.9 million of which were CARES Act funds and 1.9 million of 2018 consolidated funds. I just think it's broadly concerning to the American people when we see the appearance of political activity with federal taxpayer dollars, and we're looking for an increase in your budget. You're overseeing a lot of the grants that are going out to the states. Some of our states are using these funds in productive and thoughtful ways to better administer elections. The reason I'm pushing back is because some states aren't, and I'm uniquely concerned about this contract with California, where they gave it to, all you had to do is go to their website, and they were self-listing themselves as a proud member of Team Biden. I think that should be concerning across the board. I appreciate all of our commissioners being here. I will now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Morelli, for purposes of asking questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things I just point out. I do want to correct the record. I believe EAC commissioners were here in May of 2019 on the question of election security, not 2011. So I just wanted to make sure I made that point. And I must admit, as much as I appreciate you holding up the Joe Biden for President sign, in fact, you could hold it up behind me, Mr. Chairman, I do want to just take a moment. I only have 5 minutes, but I do want to, first of all, submit, with unanimous consent, like to submit a copy of the Inspector General's actual report on the issue that's being talked about. It's dated February 9th, 2022, and it comes from Inspector General Schlitz. And I just want to, I'll read at least, well, a couple of things I do want to note since we're going to spend some time here apparently talking about this. First of all, the contract was not sole sourced. It says that in the Inspector General's report. It actually, a number of firms bid on the work, and SKDK was one of the vendors chosen. But as it relates to the conclusions of the Inspector General, first of all, in the first part, federal funds were not used for registration drives. California launched a public education campaign called Vote Save California. It indicates that nothing that SKDK, I'm going to get that right, did not violate anything in that regard, nor did the contract. And as it relates to get out the vote, it said the EAC grant funds for messages educating a specific population about safety voting during the population is allowed. Similarly, EAC said an advertisement directing the public to California's voting website is allowable because the website has additional educational information on how to vote safely or procedures for voting. So we found no specific activities or messaging that met the definition of get out the vote. And it concludes, and this is the important part, I would think, the operative part, the conclusion by the Inspector General is based on the evidence. California Secretary of State Office executed the SKDK contract in accordance with EAC guidelines, and funds were not used for unallowable costs such as registration drives or activities meeting the definition of get out the vote. So I just wanted the record to reflect. We can talk about this, I suppose, all day long, but the actual Inspector General who you're referring to basically concluded that they had followed all the rules California had, and there's no there. So I want to just make sure that enters in the record with
Without objection.
unanimous consent. Using just my last few minutes, perhaps Commissioner Hicks, our elections environment is constantly changing. Election administrators deal with ever-evolving cybersecurity threats and the rapid spread of mis and disinformation. We need to consider the physical safety of election workers and now must respond to an increasing number of records requests, analysis requests, and respond to the threat AI may pose to us all, and on top of that, actually run elections. Could you please comment on how increased and reliable funding could alleviate some of this significant burden?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. Increased funding, when we go to election offices, the number one thing they ask for is additional funding. It's usually one or two people in the office that is trying to do 9 different jobs in an office. And so they are looking to, the chairman had asked a little bit earlier, have we increased our authority? We haven't increased our authority, but the scope of our jobs have increased in terms of cybersecurity issues that no one thought of in 2003 or in 2002 when HAVA was enacted, but also the fact that we are also fighting nation states in terms of mis and disinformation. And it's not really feasible to ask a city clerk in a small town to fight against a superpower for mis and disinformation when the U.S. government should be doing that. So we have worked with our partners, with the federal government, that being the DHS. When elections were elevated to critical infrastructure, we were able to do a lot more things in that sort of realm. But I do believe that with increased funding and increased responsibility, we will have to be able to do that so that votes can be counted accurately.
Very good. I had a number of other questions, but my time is going to come to an end. But before I do that, Mr. Chairman, I also ask unanimous consent that the Bren Center's June 2023 voting laws roundup, which found between January 1 and May 29th, at least 11 states have enacted 13 restrictive laws, including 7 that curb access to mail voting, and an onerous law in Florida, which would significantly reduce voter drives in advance of the 2024 election.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Laudermilk is recognized for 5 minutes.
Hit the wrong button. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to each of our panelists for being here today. Chairwoman McCormick, last year in 2002, the EAC received $75 million in election security grants. In 2024, the EAC has requested $300 million in election security grants. Now, my calculation, that's about a 300% increase. Now, I know the entire nation has been affected by the out-of-control Bidenflation that we have right now, but I don't even think that's at 300%. That leaves us to question, what are these grants going for, and can you explain such a massive increase?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Laudermilk. The EAC itself is not requesting that money for our operations. We constantly hear from states and localities of the need for additional funding. And part of that is they are in the process of purchasing new and updated voting equipment. A lot of the equipment that's out there has been certified to standards that were passed in 2007. So we need to update election equipment across the country. Additionally, we need to provide cybersecurity measures on all of the machines and all of our systems to make sure that we are fighting against any kind of intrusion on our election systems. It is a question of national security, and that is why there has been an increase in the request. We are approaching the 2024 elections. We have heard from our partners at CISA and other agencies that they expect a ramp up in attacks on our systems, and election officials need to defend those election systems in advance of the 2024 elections.
So in
and be
summary, this
prepared.
is election integrity.
A lot of it is
type security.
election integrity and security.
Okay, security being securing ballots, securing individuals.
Securing the voting systems, securing
Okay.
the ballots, physical security, and cybersecurity.
Okay. How are you going to ensure that the grants are distributed and used properly?
Well, there is a distribution formula that we have to follow. So we make sure that our grants team follows all the federal rules on grant making and requires all the federal financial reports and progress reports, which are required usually semi-annual. The last tranche of money required them to be filed quarterly. And we follow up with the states on any issues that they have in using the grants appropriately. We also then make sure that the Inspector General is aware of all of the ways that the states are utilizing that money, and she does the audits for the EAC.
Okay. Hypothetically, if there was a suspicion that grants were not used properly, what measures do you take to investigate that?
Well, the Inspector General is the person who investigates whether funds were used appropriately or not. And then it can mean that money can be repaid into the federal treasury if it is found to be used inappropriately.
Okay, thank you. On December 12th, 2022, the EAC Inspectors General put out a Management Advisory 23-01 over concerns that the Help America Vote Act does not define voter registration, voter education, or get out the vote. Yet HAVA funds cannot be used for these purposes. Are you aware of jurisdiction using HAVA funds to engage in these efforts in violation of HAVA?
We monitor the use of the the HAVA funds, and we have not found that to be the case. We are constantly making sure that the funds are used for allowable purposes only.
Okay, thank you. I yield my remaining time to the chairman.
Thank you very much. I just want to go back to a point my colleague made regarding the grant to California. I just think it's worth taking 10 seconds to clean up. I think it is technically true that the Inspector General came back and noted that it wasn't for a technical get out the vote, but the challenge is the OIG issued the alert to the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission to identify risks because of the following terms: voter registration, voter education, and get out the vote are not defined in HAVA, and EAC has not adopted its own formal definition. And so if we walk away with anything, it's, man, we got some cleanup work to do to make sure that we're not allowing federal funds to go to Team Biden to do get out, what I would call, and I think most Americans would call, get out the vote efforts. And so I just think that's an important piece. Cognizant of the time, I'll now recognize Mr. Murphy, Dr. Murphy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate y'all coming today. I've had some interesting reading this morning. I had not read the President's executive order, and I just, guys, I just can't help think if we want clear and we want free and fair elections and everybody to vote who legally vote, how much mail-in voting was pushed. I remember patients telling me so many times that on different occasions they would receive 5 or 6 ballots in the mail from their neighbors or for somebody else. And we were in testimony a few weeks ago. One of the gentlemen noted that Secretary of State of Michigan did not want to remove 25,000 dead people on a roll. To push out mail-in voting, I think it's great for our folks that can't get out. But to push it out, I see no other method that is so ripe for the potential of fraud than mail-in voting. I have to make that comment. I know my Democratic colleagues see very much differently, and the president sure is pushing that. But it just seems like an absolute recipe for attempted fraud in that manner. So, Ms. McCormick, I'm very interested. Everybody's talking about cybersecurity. Can you give me an example of what's being done and what we found in the past as attempts to infiltrate our election process?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Murphy. We had found, CISA had found in 2016 election that some nation-state actors had tried to utilize online voter registration systems and other election supporting technology to intrude into the election system. They were not successful. But we have
I just ask, I need specifics on that when they get in the system. Do they mean actually go in and change ballots? Do they mean, what do you really actually technically mean?
It was not changing ballots, sir. It was getting information from the voting registration systems. We don't have the details of that. That is something you would have to ask CISA about. They have not shared that information, nor has the FBI with us. Okay. But we do take the security of our systems very, very seriously. And we just recently passed an updated version of the BVSG 2.0 that has many increased requirements for security, and I can give you some of those.
All right, well, let me just continue. Thank you.
Okay.
You know, with the great Russian hoax that one of our colleagues persisted with a lot of the, one of the former president candidates, I don't think we have to hopefully worry too much about Russia. I think China is right now our greatest enemy, and I fear for what they would do. We have a president that's very pro-China, and I'm very fearful in that regard. Let me just go back to this executive order. Did you or anybody in your office consult with the White House about this executive order, or did it just come out from somebody in a cubicle with their grand ideas?
I'm not aware of anyone in our office coordinating with the White House on that order. We were not tasked under that order to do anything.
So you're not in charge of implementing anything with that executive order?
We are not. We had a couple of federal agencies ask us for assistance. The National Institute of Standards and Technology asked us for information on and a white paper on disability, as they were tasked to look into disability issues with regard to that order. And I believe GSA also asked us for some advice. But while we did not do anything other than what we already do. Okay. To reply to that order.
All right, thank you. You know, there's been a lot of dark money or whatever, a lot of political influence from people who have a lot of money in this country. Mr. Hovland, can you expound upon your support? You had voiced support for Mark Zuckerberg's private funding of election administration. Why do you think he has the great, just since he's one of the richest men in the world, why he should be determining our election outcomes?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I don't believe that he has had any determination in the outcomes. And what I testified to House Appropriations in 2021 was that I thought it was unfortunate that our election officials had to be dependent on the charity of billionaires, that I feel that it is a failure of government to not provide adequate funding for elections. I think philanthropic dollars have gone to do a lot of great things, but as far as funding elections, I think that is a responsibility of government. And I think it's critical that we provide adequate funding so that
you don't feel the actions of Zuckerberg are really a good patriotic thing? That's what I'm hearing you say.
From interviewing election officials who received that money, I know so much of it went to get PPE, to have protective equipment, to have hand sanitizer, to be able to... You can understand the appearance
of such, that it's influence, and we know of all those things happening. You know, I don't agree with the Supreme Court decision many years ago that allowed all this extra money to come in. I absolutely think it was the wrong thing to do. We just want free and fair elections across this country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I seek unanimous consent to insert the Inspector General's management advisory previously referenced. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize Mr. Carey for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I have a series of questions that I want to go to, but I just had one question for you, Ms. McCormick. We're talking about the needs, the state requests and the needs, and you talk about the distribution formula. I think you mentioned that to the chairman. There is a formula. And I had not seen, the chairman, I had not seen that graph of the president on before till today, but should that formula, should that not also include making sure that the vendors don't don't side with one side or the other, that they're completely bipartisan as it relates to receiving the HAVA grants?
The vendors don't receive the HAVA grants, Congressman. Those go straight to the states.
The states, but then they in turn,
Well, the states usually provide sub-grants to their counties.
Right.
And then the counties and the states decide how that money will be used as long as it's allowable within HAVA. The vendors do not receive the money. However, they do get contracted by the states and the local jurisdictions to provide equipment.
but they don't do it
and
for
services.
free, right?
The vendors do not do it for free, no, sir.
So where do they get their money?
The vendors are the states and local jurisdictions contract with the vendors. And oftentimes they use HAVA money, but they also use other funds that are provided by their level of government.
So the vendor may not receive the HAVA grant directly.
Correct.
But vis-a-vis a state or some other entity would then pay the vendor, but it's not directly related to the HAVA grants. Is that what you're saying?
That's right, but I do agree with you that it should be a nonpartisan provision of
Yeah, because
election.
I don't, whether it was President Biden, President Trump, it doesn't matter to me. I'm just saying that I think that it should be, that entity should not be partisan.
I would agree with you, Congressman.
And one other thing, I was reading through your testimony. You mentioned in here, and again, it's a question, I'm not trying to focus on, but you mentioned AI tools making it harder for voter education. Can you just give me briefly, because I got some other questions I want to go to.
Yes, sir, that is something new that we're now combating and how to respond to possible mis and disinformation and use of AI in election information. We've created an internal working group to work on the ways that could happen and what we might do to combat those AI-generated.
I may want to follow up with you on that, just
Yes, sir.
because I have a keen interest in that. Mr. Palmer, number one, I want to thank you for your service to the country. Appreciate that. Where are most of the election equipment manufacturers? Where are they located? Are they in the United States or are they outside of the United States?
The manufacturers themselves are in the United States, yes.
Okay. So do we have any of the manufacturers that are located outside of the United States?
No, if you're asking are the voting machines manufactured overseas, that's yes.
Okay. So when the EAC adopts a new VVSG standard, what happens to election equipment certified under a previous standard?
Well, it remains certified. We have, those standards were earlier standard. We have new standards, but it takes time to migrate to the new higher standards, get the manufacturers to design and bring those to a test lab to be tested. So we have full confidence that the systems that we tested are still operational. And those decisions on when to transition to, let's say, another 1.0 version or the new generation of systems, that's going to be a local decision or a state decision on when they feel they need to move on from their equipment.
No, but if they're, I mean, they can still be used, in other words.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are there security threats that exist with still using the older type machines?
Well, one of the things, yeah, I would say yes, there are security concerns. That's why we take measures like, for example, we've added penetration testing to all our older systems. So if there are any updates or upgrades, before it goes to a lab, it needs to go through penetration testing. And so that was a new feature that we brought in. So there is concerns, and so we are addressing those.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank all the witnesses here today. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Lee is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I'd like to begin by thanking you for being here today. To have all four of you present with your collective experience and expertise is really a valuable thing for us. So I thank you for spending your time with us today. And Commissioner Palmer, I would like to pick up right where you left off and spend a little more time talking about VVSG 2.0, what that means for the election community and how it can be implemented. So you were speaking just a moment ago in response to Mr. Carey's questions about the continued use of voting systems that had been certified under the previous and tested under the previous guidelines. And so if you would share with me a little bit about how if a state is interested in coming up and using systems that are compliant with 2.0, you mentioned that might take time to do. Share with us a little bit more about the logistical and expense considerations that are associated with replacing and updating a state's certified voting systems?
Okay, sure. I mean, at the state level, for example, if you want to move to a 2.0 system, the reality, though, is that the manufacturers have to design those systems to meet the new standards. And once they feel confident that they can undergo a campaign at the EAC for that testing, they're gonna make a submission. It's going to be tested, and it'll eventually be approved or disapproved at some point in the process. But that's only the first step. That only makes it available for that vendor to then take it to the states. There may be testing, there may be state testing. But at some point, the goal is to make sure that these are fully tested machines that are available to be purchased by the localities and for use by the voters. But it takes some time because we've got to go through that testing process first to make sure we're confident.
So at this point, have any of the voting systems manufacturers developed and submitted a voting system that's compliant or that they purport would be compliant with VVSG 2.0, or are those still being developed now?
So we do have one system that's in an accredited lab undergoing testing, and every day you hear rumors that they'll be bringing it in sooner than later, but then things get pushed. So I can't really give you any definite details on the calendar or timeline, but you generally hear that in 25, 26, you will have some systems that will be tested and perhaps going out to market at some point.
Okay.
But
But
there won't be 2.0 systems for 2024.
For 2022. So
Because
right now, today, even if elections officials were interested in converting, there's not a system that's ready, tested, available on the shelf for them to implement that's VVSG 2.0.
That's correct, Congresswoman.
And share, if you would, a little bit more about the testing and the ongoing review and testing for the systems that are currently in use, and some of the reasons you have confidence in the fact that they are secure and accurate and appropriate for use in American elections.
Well, the testing program doesn't end. I mean, we do have a life cycle policy that we'll continue to test these systems until 1 year after there's a new system in place. And so there are still systems that are being submitted and we're undergoing testing. And the federal testing is really the first step. We do have the penetration testing that we undergo at the federal level. And then a lot of states will have their own testing program to either supplement that process. And then voters should be confident the localities, they do logic and accuracy tests on the front end and after an election. So it really is it's sort of an overwhelming number of sort of audits that take place and sort of testing of the voting equipment. And these are why you can be confident that the systems that are on the street to say are still as reliable and accurate as they were 6 months ago.
And you just touched on another thing that I think is so important, and that is opportunities for the public to be engaged and to observe, both in the development of new standards and also the testing of equipment and these pre- and post-election audits that occur. Would you share with us, and I know you have multiple forms of experience that are relevant to this question, both as an EAC commissioner and as a former state elections director. Share with us, if you will, some of the opportunities for the public to be a participant and observer in the development of new technology standards and also the testing of this equipment.
Well, the public had a large role in the development of these standards. When you go back to 2.0, that process of developing standards for 2.0 involved election officials, but it involved experts, it involved the public. It was out for public comment multiple times. When we would have hearings with our advisory boards made up of election officials and experts, the public was often available for public comment. And then when you go to any state, for example, we were in Louisiana, Commissioner Hicks and I, on their discussions on new voting systems, and they would bring in the EAC and other experts to talk about what the standards would mean, what were the new security standards, what are the new audit standards, and the public was there to make comment and to hear that testimony, including legislators and congressmen.
All right. Thank you all. I've used my time. So thank you all again so much for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. I request unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 articles. Anita Dunn was the managing director of SKD Knickerbocker, and so I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a New York Times article titled "Strategizing for the President and Corporate Clients 2" from 2012, as well as an article published by Albert Hunt, Biden needs to institute a new era in public ethics. Without objection, so ordered. In consultation with the ranking member, we have one more member who is in a foot race to get here. Knowing that we would otherwise switch panels, I asked our witnesses just to stand by for 2 minutes with the hope that Mr. Good makes it before we wrap up this panel. So we'll pause in place for about 2 minutes.
Hope this is worth it.
If his staffer hadn't texted 10 minutes that he's actually running, so he's gonna be like out of breath.
We're gonna see what kind of shape he's in.
Put the carpet, right? So
He's got the carpet that's
And he's got traction.
I played in the soccer match last night. I'm so sore.
Oh,
It is members.
Were they a team?
It's members and pros. So it's like Democrat, Republican, but it's like, it's so unfair. So it's like you versus me, and then like next to us is like somebody played in the world. So I played defense.
oh my.
Is my mic on?
that's what our
Oh.
Our ambient noise?
I think
We're getting picked up. Is this my override?
All right, as our colleague gets seated, I'll add one note here. Pursuant to paragraph H of Committee Rule 9 and in consultation with the ranking member, I move that counsel for the majority and counsel for the minority be permitted to question our witnesses. We'll utilize this on the next panel. Our witnesses for up to 20 minutes with the time equally divided and available in 5-minute increments. Without objection, so ordered. Again, that'll be for the next panel. Mr. Good, are you? I'll give you. No, we appreciate you coming.
I think that's on.
All right.
Log is taking a moment, so
I now
hold the clock
recognize.
for just a few seconds till it. We got the old spinning going on here, but the answers are in here. So actually, the answers are over there, right? Chairman, I'm sorry, but it's taking.
Take a second.
All right, we're pretty dang close now. Okay, thank you.
We appreciate you being here, Mr. Good. We've waved Mr. Good on from the great state of Virginia. Mr. Good, you're now recognized for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for letting me join this committee for this special hearing today. And I've got a couple of questions for Commissioner McCormick, if I may. In June 2022, the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, conducted a vulnerability analysis of Dominion Voting Systems Democracy Suite ImageCast X, which is an in-person voting system used to allow voters to mark their ballot. CISA's report outlined 9 vulnerabilities. With that said, how confident are you that our voting systems can be protected or even ideally made immune from hacking or other vulnerabilities?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Good. No system is immune from attack, but we do our best to protect the systems. And we are working to increase the security on our systems with our new VVSG 2.0 requirements. And additionally, we will be starting a consolidated vulnerability disclosure program to make sure that any kind of vulnerabilities are identified and addressed in a very efficient and quick manner to make sure that the voting systems remain secure. We also just going to see the report ourselves today, so we're interested in looking at that report, and we understood from the CISA's report of reviewing the Dominion machines that most of those vulnerabilities have been closed.
So if you were going to compare how protected versus how vulnerable, say, November 2020, compared to how you hope it to be in 24, how would you sort of quantify that in a guesstimate, an estimate? How much better are we?
Well,
hopefully in 24 than we were maybe in 20.
You know, we did not see any vulnerabilities exploited in 2022, and I think we will.
Not any.
We didn't see them exploited, no, sir. And we believe that the machines were secure in 2022, and they will be secure or more secure in 2024.
Well, we all certainly hope so and trust so. The National Election Defense Coalition, according to them, has said that e-voting machines have added and subtracted votes not cast by voters, changed voters' choices on the screen, given voters the wrong ballot, passed pre-election testing, and failed on election day. You know, they passed the pre-election testing, but they failed on election day, reversed election outcomes, broken down generally, and just caused long lines during elections. That is according to the National Election Defense Coalition. And I will tell you, we held a roundtable discussion on this issue in my district, 3 members of Congress and a number of state delegates and senators in Virginia, and had some experts come in. And I can tell you that I witnessed a demonstration, and I'm trying to bring it before this larger body. I and my colleagues witnessed a demonstration. This was a few months ago, apart from an actual election. It wasn't part of but where a tech expert appeared to hack into the voting systems and change results before our very eyes. We watched it happen, change things, change them back to show us how easy it was to do. CISA, the CISA report, well, let me just pause. What is your reaction to that?
I'm not aware of the demonstration that you're talking about. I would be interested.
Right, you wouldn't be aware of that, but I'm saying I watched this by this, whom I believe to be a credible, trusted resource, do this before mine and 2 other colleagues' eyes, along with a number of other individuals that were there. And so what I mean is just the fact that that could possibly happen, what would be your reaction to that?
Well, I think, yes, the vulnerabilities can be exploited for sure, but it depends on the environment we're in, how the setup is, how much time people have, what the machine is, has it been certified? There are a lot of questions that would need to be answered, and we would love to be able to see that and look at it. There are definitely anomalies that happen in the systems, but we do have a defense in-depth program through our VVSG and through other programs through CISA, and we are working to keep those machines as secure as possible.
Yeah, to my colleagues on this committee, even would like to try to bring this individual before individual on this committee. Last thing I'll just ask, what's the likelihood that a foreign power such as China, who have obviously an active spy operation, including trying to put the facility in Cuba, that they could leverage vulnerabilities for their interests with our election system?
Well, our machines are not, our voting systems are air-gapped from the internet, so it would be difficult for them to get to every machine across the country to exploit any kind of vulnerability.
Did I understand you to say they're gapped, meaning disconnected from the internet?
Correct.
Okay, the demonstration I saw literally was through the internet connecting
well,
that I saw.
our machines are not connected to the internet, and they're not connected to each other. So each machine stands on its own. There are cases where the machines do get connected at the time that results are modemed in some cases. But we require an air-gapped system in 2.0, and we will make sure that the machines are not connected to the internet.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it.
The gentleman yields back. We thank our colleague from Virginia for joining us today on the Committee on House Administration. We thank our witnesses today for appearing before us. It's been very helpful. Members of the committee may have additional questions for you, and we ask you please respond to those questions in writing. We'll dismiss this panel, and we'll begin our second witness panel momentarily. Thank you for being here. I did that without a mic. I did that without a mic.
Chairman, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Test.
I'm going to bring us back to order if everyone's ready. Ms. Schletz, we appreciate you being with us today and look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to paragraph B of Committee Rule 6, the witness will please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative and may be seated. I'll now introduce our witness. Inspector General Schletz was appointed unanimously by the commissioners of the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission and began serving as Inspector General in November 2021. Prior to assuming the role of Inspector General at the EAC, Ms. Schletz spent 8 years at the U.S. Agency for International Development Office of Inspector General, where she served as director and established a new strategic division within the office. As a reminder, we've read your written statement and it'll appear in full in the hearing record. Under Committee Rule 9, you're to limit your oral presentation to a brief summary of your written statement. Please remember to push the button on the microphone in front of you. After 5 minutes, we'll ask you to wrap up. Thank you for being here today, and I now recognize you, Ms. Schletz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Stile, and distinguished members of the committee for inviting me to testify about the work of the Office of Inspector General of the Election Assistance Commission. We appreciate your interest and ongoing support for our work. Our mission is to safeguard the federal investment in our electoral system by conducting objective and meaningful oversight. We do this through audits, reviews, and investigations, and much of our work is mandated by the Help America Vote Act and the Inspector General Act. EEC funds and assists states and territories in improving election processes, and it is our role to offer information and recommendations that will help EEC build and run programs that promote public confidence by preventing waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm proud that our efforts contribute toward ensuring confidence in America's election process. OIG's vision is to operate as a high-performing organization and help EEC be as efficient and effective as it can be. Our office has grown to a staff of now 6 as of yesterday, allowing us to conduct audits with independent public accounting firms and also with our own team. We've demonstrated that conducting work internally allows us to be more nimble and more responsive to incoming requests in areas of risk. For example, we recently identified issues with EEC's contracting practices, so we investigated the problem, we issued an advisory to alert them, and then we announced an audit so that we could understand the scope of the issue and make recommendations for improvement. Another risk area that we're watching closely is related to grantees using HAVA funds for voter education. We issued a management advisory in December to alert EAC to the related risks because terms such as voter education and get out the vote are not defined in HAVA. Our office maintains an OIG hotline for EEC employees and members of the public to report suspected fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. Our increased stakeholder outreach over the last year has resulted in an awareness that our office exists, what our role is, and that this reporting mechanism is out there. As a result, we processed 375 unique hotline complaints in the first half of fiscal year 2023. We refer to the Department of Justice and the FBI any potential criminal acts related to federal elections and voter fraud. And when we get complaints related to voter registration or the administration of elections, we refer individuals to the appropriate state election office. Our team reads every complaint that comes in, and to be responsive when we noticed an uptick related to the misunderstandings about EEC's testing and certification program, we launched an audit. That recently issued audit report includes 7 recommendations to improve the program. I commend the EEC staff and the commissioners for their commitment to the mission of the commission and supporting election officials in the spirit of HAVA. OIG is required to report annually on management challenges facing the EEC, and last fall we outlined 4 challenges impacting EEC that I'll discuss briefly. The first relates to balancing expectations of funding, and the second addresses challenges with attracting and retaining a highly skilled workforce. EEC's budget recently increased, and with that increase, it must responsibly spend the funds while meeting stakeholders' expanding expectations. However, we've noted that conditions such as salary caps make that difficult for EEC to attract and retain staff. EEC is using some of the additional resources it received to build up divisions, and as new staff enter the agency, there's an expanded need for strong policies, complete records, and standard operating procedures. Our work has noted areas where EEC is making progress and others that still need attention. The third challenge relates to meeting customer service and critical infrastructure goals. Stakeholders are increasingly calling on the EEC to communicate election information at the federal level. For EEC to fulfill its role as a customer service agency supporting critical infrastructure, it must continue to overcome challenges related to federal coordination, Paperwork Reduction Act, and visibility, as not everyone is familiar with the EAC. Last, providing effective oversight of grantees. EEC awards grants and monitors how states and territories spend those funds. We've noted that EEC's ability to do this can be hampered by both the grant type and grantee capacity. We acknowledge that EEC has taken some steps to strengthen its grant oversight, invested in a grants management system, and added new staff to its team, but our recent reports highlight the need for continued diligence in this area. For our part, OIG has 7 ongoing HAVA audits right now. We're also being more strategic about how we do our work. For example, we recently announced an audit of 34 states' compliance with the requirements for interest earned. Our goal with that audit is to understand the challenges related to the requirement and then to also identify best practices to help grantees navigate it in the future. In conclusion, I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony on OIG activities. Our accomplishments are a credit to the dedicated staff that I have the privilege to lead, and I'm thankful for their hard work. We're committed to independent and transparent oversight, and as state officials work to prepare for the 2024 election, we realize the importance of ensuring that EEC is set up to support them. We believe our oversight can help position EEC to do just that. Thank you, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Inspector General Schletz, thanks for being here. Thanks for your testimony. We'll begin with questions from members. We'll then proceed to questions from council, both from the minority and the majority side as well. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions. Ms. Schletz, you recently submitted a report, the EAC OIG semi-annual report to Congress, and I want to discuss some of the key findings in there. But at the time of the report was submitted, your office, you said processed, I think you said 175, I had 174 in my notes, unique complaints so far this fiscal year. That's already an increase over last fiscal year in 2022, which I believe had about 271 complaints that came through. Are there any common themes that you're seeing inside the complaints of the last 2 years or so?
The complaints really do vary. What we do see is an uptick when states are having an election. We'll see more things come in. Quite a few of our complaints are related to the administration election, so we're referring states to the right official within that state to get closure on whether the allegation may be. I can't say that we've seen specific trends, but I do have a breakdown in the more.
So let me dive in maybe then specifically. So if nothing jumps out to you, is we think about this last year, Georgia passed a voter integrity bill, made a lot of noise, right? A lot of news came out of this. The President of the United States called it Jim Crow 2.0. Major League Baseball took the All-Star game and moved it out of Atlanta. Really draconian and over-the-top rhetoric from my colleagues on the left. Did you see a huge uptick in calls from the state of Georgia following the passage of this law?
No, I can say that for the fiscal 2023 numbers, what we have seen, we had 374 unique complaints, and only 5 of those involved Georgia. They all were around the general election and the Senate runoff.
So less than 2% fiscal year for folks that maybe aren't always aware of fiscal years versus annual years. You guys run on a fiscal year because Congress runs on a fiscal year, but that includes the election.
Yes.
The election of last year in 2022, after, quote, Jim Crow 2.0, voter integrity laws are passed in Georgia, less than 2% of your calls came from the state of Georgia. Is that accurate?
I can say only 5 involved it. Oftentimes,
5 out
the
of
complaint
375, so less than 2%. The reason I say 2% is because it was randomly averaged over 50 states, and Georgia's bigger than average, so it should show up at an even larger percentage if we assume it's based on population. What we're seeing is no real uptick at all. Why? Because people actually like the voter integrity law that was passed in Georgia. The evidence not only shows up that people aren't calling in because they don't have complaints, it also shows up because people were happy. If you look at the polling data on how people felt about the process of voting in Georgia, but also voter turnout increased in the state of Georgia and across all key demographic groups. Let me shift gears if I can. Again, your office recently completed the audit of HAVA funds, in particular as it relates to the CARES Act, awarded to California. How much money was awarded to California?
They had a total for all of the HAVA funds of $216.3 million.
$216.3 million total funds awarded to California, and was the main group. What was the main group that it was awarded to in California? Was what firm?
That's the total pot of money of election security funds, 251 funds, the 101 HAVA funds, and then also CARES funds.
And then the CARES funds.
Okay, if you're speaking about the CARES funds, let me get you the exact number. And I believe you're referring to the SKDK contract, how much was awarded there?
Yes.
Yeah. So what we found is that 11.8 million in EAC HAVA funds were used for that contract. 9.9 million of those were CARES Act funds.
And does it concern you that this entity, through an expedited grant process, has ties to the Biden campaign?
We issued a December advisory that outlined some of the risks that we see with there being no mention in HAVA about restrictions around voter education campaigns. We think it's just an area of risk in general.
So would you recommend that policymakers put in place parameters to make sure that these types of grants aren't going to entities with clear political ideological leanings?
It is always, more helpful for us to have strong criteria to audit against. Without that, we are reliant on kind of the EEC and what their guidance is on each individual case-by-case basis on a state. That's what we point out in the advisory, that just raises increased risk that you're not providing the same guidance to each state without
You know,
that.
I appreciate that. I think you pointed out a huge risk, and I think it's incumbent upon EAC and policymakers to put forward the guardrails that are needed to make sure that grant funding doesn't go to entities where you can simply go look on their website and claiming that they're part of a presidential campaign. I think that is an affront. People, if you told somebody in Wisconsin we spent millions of dollars and gave it to an entity that was part of Team Biden or Team anybody, I think they'd look at you and think you're nuts. That's what happened. I think we got to put the guardrails in place, and I appreciate your review and examination. I now recognize Mr. Carey for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witness for being here today. Can you briefly describe the audit process at the EAC? Just kind of briefly describe how you go about doing that.
Sure. We do a risk assessment process to determine what we're going to audit. We have a couple different types of audits. So some of our work is mandated by law, and those are required audits that we do annually. We also have the HAVA audits, which we do that based on a risk-based approach to determine which states are audited. And then we have discretionary audit work. The discretionary audit work is often launched when there's a risk area that we see or like a complaint comes in. So for example, the testing and certification audit, we were getting additional complaints around that. So we launched an audit to describe it. So that's how we select an audit. Did you want me to also touch on the process? Or?
Yeah, because where I'm going to go is in HAVA funds.
Okay. So for the HAVA funds, we make a determination if we're going to do the audit internally or if we're going to hire a contracted independent public auditing firm or accounting firm in order to conduct that work. They select, we have a scope determined of how many or how much of the funds is going to be audited, and then that audit follows normal audit procedures.
So how many would you say were done?
So we have, let me pull up the numbers. We're currently have 5 ongoing audits that our an independent public accounting firm is conducting. With the conclusion of those 5 audits, all states and territories will have been audited once, at least. That was our goal, was to get there. The additional factors that impact whether we're auditing can be, if complaints come in, if something is raised from the grants team, we might highlight it for an additional audit, or if the findings are particularly significant.
So along with that, so what steps does the EAC take to, how do I want to say, how do they respond to the audits?
EAC?
Yeah.
So EAC is the responsible party for working with the state in order to close recommendations. So they sort of act as an intermediary, as the one issuing the grants. So we or the audit firm would put out recommendations to the state for things to correct or findings. EEC would be the one that looks at whatever they return and determines closure on those recommendations.
So let me ask, and again, and probably some of my colleagues probably understand this process a little better than I do, but so when you make the recommendations, or you say that these are the things, who rectifies the things that you've identified as that are issues?
Yeah, that would be the state office that's responsible for receiving the grant money. So it can vary from state to state, but it would be the office within the specific state or territory that receives grant funds.
So what happens if they don't rectify?
The recommendation would remain open. I can say right now, typically states have been pretty good about closing those. Right now we have 8 open recommendations, 4 for the Northern Mariana Islands and 4 for Delaware.
So in a case where you have recommendations, what generally is the time frame that you see on average per state or territory that they rectify?
Typically, we like to see closure within 6 months, but we understand that in some cases, depending on what the recommendation is, that could take longer. But usually the target is 6 months. Otherwise, those are reported in our semi-annual report to Congress as open recommendations, open longer than 6 months.
So so how many you say are still on that have not been? Do you have some that still? You have 8. You said 5 ongoing investigation or audits right now.
So we have 5 audits, 7 that we plan to start within this fiscal year.
Okay. And then you have 8 that are ongoing, you said?
I'm sorry, we have 8 that we are expected by the end of the fiscal year. 2 HAVA audits have been issued this fiscal year, and then we plan to start 6 more. So we have quite a few that we're trying to do this year.
So let me ask you, are there any steps that the EAC should be taking that they are not taking in response to your audits?
I think the EAC generally has been responsive to our recommendations and working with the states in order to resolve those things. There are some areas where there could be improvement.
Could you maybe
Yeah.
elaborate on what you think there could be improvement?
Sure. We've noticed that there could be opportunities for capacity building. Specifically, we saw that with the Northern Mariana Islands. They just didn't have the internal controls in place in order to receive those funds. They received them for the first time in 2020, so I think that's an area for improvement. Additionally, we've identified findings where the federal financial reports that are required to be submitted don't reconcile to the general ledger. That's an area where EAC oversight, getting those federal reports, they could be checking things like that.
Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank the witness. Thank you for your time. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Okay. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I apologize, popping in and out from different hearings. Ms. Schlitz, is that right?
That's correct.
All right. In March of 2023, your office completed an audit of the EAC's testing and certification program. What was audited and what led you to conduct the audit?
Yes, that audit was initiated based on us getting an uptick of complaints into our hotline, mainly related to concerned citizens that had a misunderstanding of how the program operated. So we launched that audit with 2 objectives. One was descriptive in nature, to just describe the program, and the second that was going to identify or was meant to identify factors that could be improved on the program or that impact the program.
Okay. Did you have any key findings of the audit, and what were they?
Yes, I think overall on that first descriptive objective found that the EEC has a robust lab accreditation program and voting system certification process. However, the second objective that we had noted some areas that the program could be improved, specifically related to stakeholder coordination, policies, procedures, communication, and staffing. And then we also found that they hadn't done a formal assessment of risk with the program, which could help them in determining areas to focus attention or where staffing and resources are needed.
Did you recommend any actions in response?
Yes, we made 7 recommendations in that report.
Okay. I don't have any other questions at this time, and I now recognize the majority counsel for 5 minutes for questions.
Well, good afternoon at this point. It's a little bit different being in this seat, and it's nice to see you in person, Ms. Schlitz. We've really appreciated your regular contact with committee staff and the updates that we've done virtually. Thank you for being here today. I want to start going back to the management advisory that Mr. Stile was discussing earlier. It was Management Advisory 2301 that was released by your office on December 12th of last year. This is the one where you were discussing the difficulties that states have because the terms voter registration, voter education, and get out the vote are not defined in HAVA. And so that creates some of the, I think generously we'll say confusion perhaps that happened in some states. Are there other areas of federal law that you're familiar with that might define these terms that the commission could look at for some guidance?
Yes, our advisory pointed out, I believe, 2 different definitions. One being the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002 offers a definition, and then also there's another definition that we pointed to as well that could have been used.
And do you recommend that the commission adopt one of these existing definitions as opposed to writing its own?
I don't know that we have an opinion about that. It's more just helpful if there's clear guidance so that when we're looking at things, it's easier for us to identify if the cost is allowable or not.
Understood. Has the commission, has the EAC's guidance on these terms, the 3 I mentioned, has it always been the same or has it evolved a bit over time?
Historically, what we've seen is there's been quite a few previous OIG reports that have pointed to challenges around this area. I'm not sure if their definition has necessarily evolved or stayed consistent, but we do know that the findings related to this have been at least 19 recommendations and over $1 million questioned. I will say many of those end up not actually being sustained question costs because the EAC determines that the cost is allowable. I think that for us is where it's a challenge.
Where it's difficult to understand getting to allowable whenever there's not a set definition.
Correct.
Can you talk about the importance of consistency, not just with these three terms, but consistency with guidance and definitions given to states on how to use HAVA grant funds and why that's important?
Sure. The criteria, like the uniform federal guidance that guides all grants, that is very prescriptive. It's a lot of guidelines, and that's on purpose so that it's very clear when someone wants to know if they can do something or not, they can go and look that up. I think without having that consistent guidance, what we've found is that it's often a grants team member providing guidance to a state on a one-off basis, either through email or through even a phone call. That makes it very difficult for us to track, that there's consistency, and then also just that the communication is clear. God gets lost.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
And it's probably all very well intentioned. This is a big process, but the way that this works is someone's going to call in and ask the question, and they want to get an answer. So I think we understand that, but we definitely on the staff have been very in favor, as you know, of encouraging the development of consistent definitions to help our state partners. Going back to these definitions, has your office thought at all, we're talking about where this is in the code otherwise, would it be more helpful for Congress to add definitions to HAVA itself? Or is this something that the commission is able to do that you'd recommend that they would do and handle on their own?
I think it's kind of up to the legislators to decide. The way it stands right now, there's nothing in HAVA restricting the funds from being used, and what the restriction is it's through an EAC advisory opinion. So the commissioners essentially voted to put some limitations on those funds. So when you're asking if they could put further limitations, yes, they could. If I think that it should be in HAVA, I think if there is a interest in putting more guardrails on the funds, and there's certain things that the voter education should or should not be spent on, then that could be in HAVA as well.
Very good. Okay, so I have about a half a minute left, and we've been watching, and we saw that the territory that had been left out of HAVA, just because they hadn't sent a delegate to Congress at that point, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands has recently received HAVA funds, and there's been an audit process going through there. This is the first time that they had HAVA funds. Can you talk just a little bit about the work that your office does to make sure everyone stays on the straight and narrow?
Yes, this specific one was flagged for us by the grants team because the Northern Mariana Islands weren't doing their regular reporting requirements. So we initiated an audit internally with our own staff to take a look at things. I think there is an opportunity here. There is a need for the money and an opportunity to do capacity building. I acknowledge that they received the funds during the pandemic, so it made a site visit challenging, but that would have been a helpful thing for the grants team to do.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Minority Counsel for 5 minutes for purposes of asking questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Inspector Schletz, good afternoon to you as well. Thank you for your hard work for the commission and on behalf of the American people. I agree with my colleagues, it's been wonderful chatting with you in advance of this hearing and our ongoing oversight work. I wanted to pick up a bit of where my colleagues started, and you've done a bit to contextualize your management advisory as well. So a lot of discussion today about California and the conduct related to CARES Act funding for California, in which your February 9th letter that the ranking member introduced into the record demonstrates that those funds were used appropriately, were not used for GOTV funding. Your management advisory also lists the 19 recommendations and identifies specific states that were flagged for using those funds, including Mississippi, Florida, South Dakota, and Colorado, among others. I wanted the record to be clear on that fact. Am I correct in that assessment?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yes, am I correct in my assessment that other states have been flagged for recommendations on using funds for GOTV and voter registration?
Yes, that's correct.
Great, thank you. I want to draw your attention to the ACE Act as introduced in the last Congress. One of the provisions provides a statutory cap on your office at 7 full-time employees. In your written and oral testimony today, you've discussed how increased capacity for your office has allowed you to improve processes, have more resources, to use a mix of contracting and independent accounting firm assistance, as well as other outside federal agencies, and that you are now, quote, well-positioned to conduct audits internally, which allow you to be more nimble and more responsive to incoming requests in areas of risk. So I want to ask a few questions related to that. Would your office benefit from additional staff?
There's always more work that can be done. I think we have a good size right now in order to meet our mission, but there are areas where we could improve and do more oversight.
And in those areas, do you think having additional staff capacity would allow you to be more nimble or to internalize outside costs usually associated with independent accounting firms?
Yes, I think there's also other benefits of doing work internally. It allows us to, pivot. If we have a contracted audit, we are, bound by the terms of those contracts, so the period of performance, the scope, and so those limitations can sometimes be challenging.
That's great. What information would you want Congress, so all of us, to have so that we can more accurately understand the staffing needs of your office?
I think, I appreciate the confidence, in our work. I have no plans currently of growing our office, but I do think that the limitation or the FTE cap would potentially contradict with the IG Act, which provides that the Inspector General can appoint employees as needed to fulfill the mission. That said, and to my knowledge, EAC-OIG would be the only one with such of a type of cap. Having the flexibility to be able to pivot from contracting to internal staff is critical, I think, and finding that right mix and having the flexibility to do so is important.
Thank you. I want to drill back on a point you made, which, if I correctly heard you, you're not aware of any other statutory cap on the full-time employees of an Inspector General office. Is that right?
Correct. Usually the OIG has its own specific budget line item. There's a couple of us small ones that don't, but usually, there's no FTE cap.
Great, thank you. Are there steps that Congress can take to help further and improve your office's independence?
I think, speaking of just the budget, one of the things that we've raised with some of the other small OIGs is that our budget is combined with the agency budget, despite us having a separate request. It would increase our independence if we had a line item or even just not less than language that allowed our budget to be separate so that we could, put our resources towards that and not have to work with the agency on budgeting.
Understandable. I think it's helpful in this conversation, we've talked a lot about questions funds or unsubstantiated funds or funds spent for or put to better use. In your office's review and in all its capacities, is it fair to say that the majority or the vast majority of funds that the EAC is granting are used appropriately?
Yes, from our work, we think we've generally seen that states are administering grant funds in accordance with the guidelines. As far as the numbers, I think it's less than 1% of the costs are questioned of what we've audited in fiscal year 22 and 23. There are some states, that, like the Mariana Islands, where that number is higher, but generally it's less than 1%.
And within that less than 1% cap, I know you've identified something around $2 million of questionable funds, and cognizant that most of the funds are used appropriately. Do you have a sense of how effectively the Commission is working to claw back the unallowable funds or work with states to ensure compliance?
Yes, the grants team works really hard. We actually partner with them quite closely to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts and we are, working with the same interests in mind. They do take it seriously and they do work with states as much as they can to try to build capacity and get them to have the internal controls needed so that there's no repeat findings and so that money that needs to be returned is returned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair Rowe now recognizes the majority counsel for purposes of asking questions.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just note a couple things here at the outset that when we were looking through, and I know you don't have anything to do with legislative recommendations, but looking through the legislative recommendations that the Commission sent to us, and we make it a priority to read what you send us, what the Commission sends us, et cetera. And we just found it interesting that providing some of these clearer definitions of the terms I was talking about earlier in terms related to grants in general, that didn't seem to be included in their legislative recommendations. So Whether or not that's the right course of action, it's something we noted and something that we're looking through to find the right way to handle that. Can you talk a little bit, speaking of reading things that you send us, could you please talk a little bit about the mandatory reports that the EAC has planned for 2023, just a brief summary of what is expected to cover? I know that a lot of this is going to come from your oversight plan for the fiscal year 23.
You mean mandatory audits, is that?
Mandatory reports.
So the mandatory reports that we're required to do is FSMA, which is related to IT controls. The financial statement audit is an annual report that we're required to issue out on. Payment Integrity Act, Information Act is a mandatory report. We have our semi-annual reports to Congress. We also have the annual management challenges report.
What else do you have planned this year in terms of discretionary projects or other planned work? Is there anything that our committee members should be apprised of as we partner with you, your office, and the commission?
Ongoing, we are looking at EAC's contracting practices, so that's ongoing work that we hope to have completed either this fiscal year or next, early next. The other discretionary work that we're looking at is to also balance our the contracted HAVA audits with some of our own work, so doing some of that work internally. We also have plans to try to look at more of the impact of the HAVA funds. So right now our audits focus largely on compliance. Did they use the funds appropriately? We'd like to see how were those funds helpful, or where were their needs assessed appropriately.
I think that brings us to another really good point. As our committee members say, and I don't want to put words into anyone's mouth, but many have said elections administration isn't partisan. The election is, but not the administration. I think that's really important. I think that carries over to the EAC, and as you can see from the questioning today, a lot of members are headed in a similar direction with the EAC. And I think one of those too, in our conversations, and I'm glad to hear that the resources for your office are looking good and they're in a good spot. But one of our things too is making sure that the Inspector General's office has reserved spaces for staff, especially at a smaller agency. And so I know our members look forward to working with you throughout this next year as they're working on legislation. However that ends up looking in the final piece, to make sure that you do continue to have the flexibility and the resources that you need, especially as we're talking about bringing having the option of bringing audits internally, so that there's a little bit more of that institutional process that plays out. As I wrap up here, can you talk just a little bit about your relationship with the 4 commissioners, just in the sense of, is it a good working relationship? Are they responding to your reports in a good way? And as my colleague mentioned, anything else about the independence of your office?
Thank you for that. The relationship that I have with the commissioners is great. They're very receptive to the work that we're doing, very responsive, and I think also, have been welcomed kind of the oversight that our office brings. It is quite a bit, different, and we're doing some new and different work, and they've been receptive to that. So I don't have anything, else to add on the relationship piece. I think as far as the independence, coming from a larger OIG, there are challenges with the small OIG and independence. Particularly, we share IT services, we share budget, we share human resources, things that would be ideal if they were more independent, but also not wanting to, create a whole new entity. So I understand kind of the budget constraints there, but those are areas that we grapple with independence.
Last question that I have, has your office, the EAC is a small agency and it's moved several times in the 20 so years of its existence. Has your office looked at the frequent movement of headquarters? Has that been an issue that's come up?
That isn't something that we've looked at, but if you would like to consider work, we'd be happy to. I know their recent move happened during the pandemic, so we haven't taken a look at that. Part of the costs are audited as part of the financial statement audit, but specifically looking at the relocations, we haven't looked at.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now recognize the Minority Counsel for 5 minutes for asking questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Inspector, in your written testimony, you discussed a critical management challenge in addressing the gap between expectation on one hand and funding on the other, and I was really interested in that challenge. And you noted that to fully address this challenge, the Commission must continue to, quote, advocate for funding, demonstrate progress, and work with stakeholders to manage expectations. Why is the need to match funding and expectations so critical?
I think just looking at kind of good business, if the EEC is trying to do more than they have the resources to do, they're going to fall short, and that's not good for anybody. So I think just being able to do that and then also allocate resources where risk is. One of the things that we pointed out in the testing and certification audit is the need for the EEC to look at both staffing and risk. There's lots of federal guidance out there on how to do that, and that would help them determine what resources and staffing are needed in order to meet the areas to fulfill their mission.
So I think you've touched on part of this, but what's your assessment of the Commission's efforts to address this management challenge?
I think there is an opportunity to do it in a more formal manner. The strategic planning or strategic workforce planning guidance that's out there is fairly robust, but it would be helpful. And then also same thing with the enterprise risk management framework that's out there for federal agencies to comply with. It's a robust process, but I think that would help them to tailor it. So I do think they are assessing risk and they are assessing staffing, but to do it more formally would be a good opportunity for them to improve.
Thank you. This touches upon a question that the chairman asked related to the OIG hotline. So you noted, I think the chairman noted as well, that you've processed more complaints in the first half of the year than all of last year. Can you tell us a bit more about the process for receiving complaints, the percentages of complaints that are non-viable, and what your process is for referring those complaints out?
Of course. So of the 374 unique complaints, and I say unique because we get a lot of duplicates, there were 61% of those were non-viable. We had 13% that we referred to Department of Justice, so those would be things related to election crimes or election fraud. There were 22%, so that's the highest referred out percentage, that go to state election offices. So those would be individuals that, for example, went to go vote and they had challenges, or they had challenges with registering in their state, whatever it might be, and we refer those individuals back to the specific state office where they can get the help that they need. The rest of those complaints, which are much smaller in percentage, are ones that we either look into internally because it actually deals with something EEC OEG has jurisdiction over, or they are referred to another entity.
Post-referral, do you get any information from the entity that receives the referral? No.
We do not, no.
Great. I think just very briefly, I want to go through a quick battery of questions related to the California audit and SKDK funding. So I think the record should reflect that. So we've just talked about it a lot. Again, your context, you sent a letter on February 9th to a series of members. I believe it was Representatives Comer, Davis, and Heiss. And in that, you discussed HAVA funding, CARES Act funding, and the contract. And you noted that based on sample testing, that funds were not used by the California Secretary of State when executing the contract. Isn't that right?
Were not used inappropriately.
Inappropriately.
Yes, correct.
And did you find any instances of lobbying or use of funds for lobbying in your investigation?
No, we did not.
Did SKDK receive inappropriate access to voter information?
Not that we found, no.
And were you able to ascertain the purpose of the Vote Safe California messaging and whether or not it was appropriate under law?
Yes, the Vote Safe ad campaign was appropriate based on what we looked at.
Great.
Information we had.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I'd like to thank Ms. Schlitz for your testimony and appearing with us today. It has been very helpful. Members of the committee may have some additional questions that they will submit in writing. We ask that you respond in writing as well. Without objection, each member will have 5 legislative days to insert additional material into the record or to revise and extend their remarks. If there is no further business, I thank the members for their participation. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Oh.